Hi, everyone. Mimi Rocah here for Talking Feds. Today, I want to talk to you about something a little bit different. So far, we've been talking a lot about things happening at the federal level with the Trump administration, but there's a case happening in the Southern District of New York, a criminal case that I think is worth discussing a little bit. And that is the criminal trial against Sean Combs, who you've probably heard of. He's a big hip hop mogul with a hugely successful career in business. And he was charged, he was arrested in September of 2024 by my old office, the Southern District of New York, federal prosecutors, along with HSI, Homeland Security, who often does these kinds of cases, sex trafficking cases. And when he was arrested, he was charged with sex trafficking and also something called racketeering or RICO. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to let you know that the trial started this week. So you probably, if you've been paying attention to any other news these days, this is probably on your radar. It's got a lot of attention, kind of, in the vein of the OJ trials and other celebrity trials. But I think it's a little more important than just a celebrity trial, and I'll explain why. So the charges, I'm going to try to put them into English for you, plain English. The racketeering conspiracy charge is essentially, it's a statute that traditionally was used for organized crime families. I was an organized crime prosecutor for about 8 years, and we used it very often to prosecute mafia families, Genovese family, Gambino family, et cetera. And lately, in the past, 5 to 10 years, it's been used in more traditional settings, meaning more commercial settings, because really what a RICO is it's an association of people who have a common purpose. It doesn't need to be a hierarchical, formal organization like the Gambino crime family. It can be a group of people who kind of collectively come together but commit crimes for a common purpose. So here, the allegation is that the enterprise is all of Combs' different businesses, and they list them in the indictment, and he had several. And that in addition to the purpose of these businesses being to make music, entertainment, make money, it was also to sort of hold up the ego of Sean Combs and to satisfy his personal desires and pleasures, which they get into in the indictment. And that basically he used the resources and the people employed by his businesses, that those people helped him achieve what is described in the indictment, that it wouldn't have been possible basically without them. And that he did this by exerting power and control over all of the people who work for him. So it's an interesting theory. It's been used before, like in the case of R. Kelly and others. But, it is somewhat novel theory. What this does is it allows prosecutors to get in a lot more evidence, okay? So they have to prove certain elements of the racketeering, which I won't bore you with right now. But one of the things they have to prove are substantive underlying crimes that were committed by this enterprise. And so here they allege a whole bunch of them, like sex trafficking, which we'll get back to in a second, bribery, like bribing witnesses to keep quiet, arson, which they haven't really gotten into yet in the case, so I don't know the details of that, drug distribution, because there were drugs allegedly given to people as part of the sex trafficking, and a bunch of other ones. So let's talk about the sex trafficking for a second, because that's the biggest part of the case. The sex trafficking is separately charged as a substantive crime, so separate from this racketeering RICO conspiracy. And the sex trafficking allegations stem from this idea that the factual pattern that they brought, Combs liked to engage in sex with different women, including his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, who is sort of the star witness in the trial, and that he liked to watch her having all sorts of, let's call it very kinky kind of sex with different men. And so they would bring in men who were sex workers, prostitutes from different states, and they would bring them to New York or California or wherever they happened to be and pay them so that they would have sex and do whatever Sean Combs wanted them to do with Ventura and others. But I'm going to focus on Ventura because she's the main victim and the main witness in the indictment. And so the sex trafficking part comes from the fact that these people were paid. So you have transportation, you have commercial sex acts, and there has to be something called force, fraud, or coercion for it to be sex trafficking under federal law. So somebody needs to be either forced or defrauded or coerced into these sex acts. The allegations here are that Cassie Ventura was forced and coerced. And the way they are proving that so far is showing how Combs was violent with her. Not one time, although they do have a video of one time of him actually beating her in a hotel, which has come into evidence, but many times over the course of years of their relationship. And they were in a relationship. So what you have, though, is this idea that they were in a relationship, but it was a relationship that the government's theory is that she couldn't get out of. Essentially, she became so overcome by his power and control through the violence, through the threats by him to ruin her career, the control he had over her career. He made her famous and then kept telling her he would make her more famous and would make more songs and albums, although he didn't. And he secretly videotaped some of these sexual encounters that were really embarrassing and humiliating. And he threatened to release them if she didn't comply and sort of be compliant with him, right? Anytime she tried to leave or told him, stop being this way, the government's theory is he would either be violent with her or threaten her in this way. And that over time, you don't need for the action to actually happen. It's the threat of that. And she also testified that she knew he owned guns. So there's a lot of different kinds of evidence coming in about the coercion and the force. I can't summarize it all, but I think you get the idea. A lot of this will come down to her testimony, but there's a lot of corroboration already. We've seen the video, photographs of her with bruises on her body, but there's a lot of other witnesses to come. We're just at the beginning. Now, the defense theory, just so you understand that so far, that they came right out of the gate in their opening statements, which is where you tend to see these things develop, is that, yes, he did. He was violent with her and other people, because when he drank, when he used drugs, he could be violent. And yes, he liked kinky, offbeat sex, but none of those are criminal. And none of those things are federal criminal violations. At most, they're state violations. It's domestic violence. It's abuse. You may not like his choice of lifestyle, etc. But that doesn't make him guilty of sex trafficking. It doesn't make him guilty of this federal crime of RICO. So it's a very good defense given the facts here, right? I mean, there's a saying, admit what you can't deny when it comes to trial strategy. And here they really had no choice but to admit that he is violent because there's a video of him beating her. There are pictures of her with bruises. So they would, so let's leave it at that they really had to admit that. This strategy of saying, well, it's just, and I put that in quotes because I don't think they're minimizing it, but they're saying this is domestic violence between two partners. One, I don't think that really is going to hold up because I think that maybe it would have 20 years ago or, longer than that. But in today's world, I do think people understand that even in a relationship between two adults that actually begins as a relationship, a consensual relationship, over time, that one person can become so dependent and controlled and scared. And, there can be so many reasons. And in fact, it might be harder for someone like that to leave someone who is controlling them in that way. And so the domestic part of it, the idea that because they were in a relationship sort of negates everything else and makes the federal crimes impossible, I think is not really going to hold up. It doesn't mean that the government has, going to prove all of the elements of the crime. There's a lot here that they need to prove, and we'll have to see over time. There's a lot more witnesses to come, and also it's going to come a lot down to closing arguments at the end of the case and the judge's instructions on the law, because there's a lot of law here to instruct on. But it's a really interesting trial. I just want to end with this for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, this sort of novel use of the racketeering trial and the fact that it'll charges and the fact that it allows the government to get in all this evidence that they wouldn't otherwise be able to if they just charged sex trafficking. And, government prosecutors do that sometimes. They charge charges so that they can get evidence in as long as it's a good faith charge. The second thing that's interesting is that it's really shining a light on sex trafficking and something we call sextortion, which is really, really common out there on the internet with young people, vulnerable people who get sort of hoodwinked into sending things to people who they think they know who they are, maybe a compromising picture or information. And then all of a sudden they're controlled. They're under the control of that person who is now extorting them and saying, I want you to commit this sex act and send me a video of it, or send me money or something, or I'm going to release this video. That kind of power is, something that obviously is really, really prevalent in today's world. And I think that aspect of this, that had so much power over Cassie and the other alleged victims about releasing these sex videos is an interesting light to shine to highlight a problem out there that, people other than celebrities are encountering every day. So that's kind of a summary of where we are so far and a preview. I'm sure I'll be back to talk to you about this more as it continues. Thanks for listening. Signing off for Talking Feds.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.